meeting of the City of Charleston Audit Committee. Thank everybody who is here for being here, and begin, if you don't mind, with a moment of silence, please. Amen. Thank you. Amen. I love those bells in the background. It reminded me of a kid. Being a kid at church, right? It's awesome. So thank you for that. Nice touch and nice flair. As you all know, as you all, I'm sure, are acutely aware, the Audit Committee is a committee of the whole. We meet once a year. And our first order of business is to take up approval of the meeting minutes from September 13th, 2022. Do I have a motion?
Second.
Are there any additions, deletions? Does anyone need to read them to refresh your recollection of where you were in September 2022? All right, excellent. All those in favor? Any of those opposed? The ayes have it. Next, Ms. Wharton, I'm going to call her forward, please, to introduce to us Grant Davis with Malden and Jenkins. Ms. Wharton, the floor is yours.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
So we're here obviously to go over our financial statement audit, and Malden and Jenkins is our external auditor and perform that for us. You will hear good things about that. So I will just introduce him to you, but I also wanted to take a minute to thank my finance staff right here. Sarah Meyer is our finance director, and Tyler, because we all worked very, very hard and they've done a great job. So wanted to thank them for that. And with that, I will introduce Grant Davis with Malden and Jenkins.
Thank you very much. Yes, sir. Mr. Davis, come on forward. If you don't mind sliding that microphone just a little bit this way so we can see a little bit better from up here, that'd be great. Okay,
How's that?
great. Floor is yours.
Well, thank you for having me here today to go over the results of our 2022 calendar year ended audit. I've got a PowerPoint presentation, but before I go through that in any detail, I'll just highlight a couple of things in that I believe in front of you, you have a few documents, and I'll just briefly describe the nature of those. The first and by far the largest is the annual comprehensive financial report. That includes our independent auditors report. The second document, you'll see a caption on the front page that says something to the effect of single audit report. That's our compliance reports relative to a couple of things. One is federal spending, or spending of federal monies, I should say. And the second is our audit in accordance with government auditing standards, a report on that. That's included in that second document. And the third document is what we call our auditor's discussion analysis. And the purpose of that document is to do a couple of things. One is to just give you some analysis on the financial statements themselves. And then two, really to provide what are our required communications as the city's external auditors to you. And we've elected, we can provide those to you either verbally or written in a booklet like this. We've elected to memorialize those in this document. And I'll mention those a little bit as we go through the presentation. But with that, I'll briefly just describe a little bit about who we are as a firm. I won't read you all these statistics, but we audit about 700 governments across the Southeast, working primarily in 5 states out of about 15 offices. It's a huge part of what we do as a firm. It really represents about 30% of our firm's revenue. So it's a very significant niche. It's ultimately all I do. I was telling somebody earlier today that I have to give somebody cash in my office to do my personal tax return because I can't do it. So that's a little bit embarrassing on the one hand, and on the other hand, I hope it shows that we're focused on accounting and financial reporting for governments. As we move into the financial statements themselves, the annual comprehensive financial report, front and center, really in that document, a few pages in after the transmittal letter, you'll notice our independent auditor's report. And this slide very simply just summarizes all that. Ultimately, we've issued a clean opinion. The verbiage in the document is unmodified, and that's really not glamorous language, but it's really the only acceptable result in a financial statement audit. So again, that's a clean opinion on the financial statements, which is to say that in our opinion, they are free of material misstatement. We conducted our audit in accordance with the acronym there, as you can see on the screen, GAS, which is Government Auditing Standards. there are ultimately 3 reports that we have included in the documents. The first I just mentioned in the independent auditor's report. The second 2 are in the single audit report. They're compliance reports. One of those is our report on internal controls and compliance with laws, regulations, grant agreements, so forth. That report is not designed to offer an opinion, but to provide what we call negative assurance, which is to say, if we note any instances of non-compliance or internal control deficiencies, we're required to communicate to you all that in that report. And then the third and final that you'll notice if you read through the documents is our report, or our opinion, I should say, on the spending of federal monies. And you'll see that last kind of paragraph there at the bottom of the slide. Ultimately, the city expended almost $16 million in federal monies from a variety of sources. We were required to audit 3 of those programs in what are called major programs. That represented about 10 million of the 16 in federal spending, or 62% of total federal spending. And I am happy to say that except for one very small item, which I'll mention earlier, there was a clean report and ultimately an unmodified opinion on the compliance with federal program guidance. Another thing here to note, just kind of at the beginning, as you're, I'm sure, aware, the city for a number of years has obtained the Certificate of Achievement for Excellence in Financial Reporting. That really is above and beyond financial reporting. That's not a requirement by state law or other interested parties, but again, really above and beyond. And I just want to take a moment to commend the city and certainly the finance and accounting staff for putting in the extra work to obtain such an award. And this is graded by an international body. This document is sent to the Government Finance Officers Association on an annual basis for their review, and they provide feedback. And if it meets their requirements, you ultimately get the award. And I'm happy to report the 2021 report was submitted. The award is included in the 2022 document, and certainly the 2022 document will be submitted for their review as well. Let's see. Financial statement highlights, just to give you some big picture stuff. I don't want to take too much time in the details. So a few things to consider. This is the city as a whole, all funds, all activities as the city, and what we call entity wide, almost $2 billion in total assets. And you can see that sub bullet, the largest portion by far are capital assets. And those are things like infrastructure, buildings, land, so forth and so on, net of accumulated depreciation. Total liabilities, about $650 million, which includes the city's proportionate share of the pension liability. And this gives us net position or equity of 1.3 billion. Revenues, 436 million versus expenditures of almost 300, gives us an increase of about $140 million from 2021 to 2022 in net position or equity. The general fund, I know, is of primary interest really everywhere. And I hope this will give you some flavor beyond the numbers here. I'll just go straight to fund balance. Fund balance at $134 million represents about 7 months of expenditures in 2022 levels. So that gives you, if you didn't, essentially what we're saying here is if you didn't take in another dollar, fund balance could cover 7 months of expenditures. And then if we break that down a little bit further to unassigned fund balance, which is really is free of restrictions or commitments, really available for use, that amount represents about 3.5 months. So about 100 days of fund balance and unassigned. Again, that's at 2022 spending levels, is how we've computed that amount. And I think as a portion of total fund balance is really a pretty healthy place to be. If you think about your revenue streams and the calendar in which those are heaviest, property taxes are by and large being paid in January, February, some into March. And you should feel pretty good about where you are, having enough money to get you past the first half of the year, essentially, before having to rely on other revenue sources. So, and again, this is just from the general fund's perspective. Overall, general fund experienced an increase in its fund balance of about $17.5 million. This is very simply just a chart that shows you your revenue sources by type. The biggest bucket there is property taxes, which I don't think is anything that's not expected. But again, just something to give you a visual. This is expenditures of the general fund by type. Public safety is the largest slice of the pie there, which is not atypical for city governments in any way, but still a very large portion of the general fund's overall expenditures are for public safety. I don't want to chart you all to death, but I get some good information out of charts, and I've got a few here to look at. This is just really revenues and transfers in versus expenditures and transfers out. So money in, money out. Red is good, or excuse me, green is good. Red is money going out. I should say bad, but that's the concept here. And you can see that over the past 5 years. This is very much just how the general fund's fund balance has changed since 2018. So positively, it has increased each year since 2018, but you can see this year being 2022, the largest such increase over the last 5 years. And this tries to display, or this attempts to display the correlation between the expenditures of the general fund and its fund balance. And of course, when the two lines move closer together, you have more fund balance on hand. When they move farther apart, you have less fund balance on hand relative to spending. So again, at 200 days of total fund balance, a pretty good place to be. There are several other funds that are highlighted in what we call major funds in the financial statements. And I won't spend a lot of time here just to show you that there are a few things to note. The Capital Improvements Fund had a decline in its fund balance of about $11 million from 2021 to 2022. The King Street Gateway TIF Fund reported a $7 million increase in its fund balance. The Drainage Fund, an $8 million increase in its fund balance. And all this is ultimately reported in the financial statements. I just don't want to waste too much of your time. Hospitality Fee Fund, a $48 million increase in its fund balance, largely the result of proceeds from the issuance of bonds. So that's skewed that a little bit high there, but that's also what has the assets at such a high level, those unspent bond proceeds at the end of the year. And then all other governmental type funds, so excluding the enterprise type funds, report a $42 million increase in fund balance for the year. So fund balance as a whole is increased significantly year over year. As we look into the enterprise type funds, those that operate like a business, I think the more interesting thing to point out with parking is the operating cash flows of $21 million. So that's net cash coming in from the operation of the parking facilities, which is very positive to use to pay debt service that's outstanding, certainly reinvest in the infrastructure of the parking system, things of that nature. And you can compare that there to the $10 million increase in its equity position. So cash has increased $11 million more than even equity did. This is just to highlight the pension plan. It's ultimately a large number in the financial statements to the tune of about $186 million. There's nothing that anybody can do about it. But when I say that, I mean in terms of lessening the burden of the liability to pay it off or anything. But the pension plans that PIBA administered had a very positive year. Last year, being 2021, it did not have such a positive year this year, which you can see indicated in the funded percentage there at the bottom. It went from 65% funded to 62%. And what I mean by funded is this is saying that the plan has assets in a trust to pay only 62% of the total liability that it projects. And again, that's subject to a variety of factors on an annual basis. But again, it's a large number, and I just wanted to highlight the view of that. And really to demonstrate what we're looking at here, if you start at the left-hand side, the numbers on the far left are all the calculation of what's called the total pension liability. And then as we move to the right, we subtract out fiduciary net position, and then that gives us the pension liability total there and how that's being calculated. The other communications that I mentioned at the beginning, these are things like we are independent of the city and all related organizations in conducting our audit. Again, we conduct our audit in accordance with government auditing standards. We didn't have any disagreements with management. We didn't have any uncorrected misstatements. And again, these are all memorialized in their full detail in the auditor's discussion and analysis document. But those are the nature of those communications that we are required to make to you all as your external auditors. Last couple things, as I mentioned, we have in the single audit report section in the compliance report, we have two reports. One of those is the report on internal controls and compliance, and the other one is our opinion over federal spending. And I'll mention again, we had a clean opinion on the federal programs, compliance with those requirements, but we did note what we call a significant deficiency in internal control relative to one of the programs that we were required to audit as a major program. This Assistance to Firefighters Grant Program has a variety of compliance requirements that are required to be maintained on an annual basis. One of those is related to reporting. Certain data has to be reported to the federal government on a quarterly basis. And some of those reports that were required were not filed within the required time frame. In fact, if I recall, they had not been filed at all until we mentioned it, and then they were subsequently filed. So again, the reports have been filed. It's really a timing issue of just not meeting the letter of the law, so to speak, as the federal government decides it. But that is what we call, again, an internal control deficiency. And that is the only real negative thing that I can think of in our report. We had no further recommendations. We didn't have any other instances of internal control deficiencies relative to our audits. So that's hopefully a high enough level overview to give you some good information, but not to lose anybody in the detail.
All right, thank you very much. Any questions for Mr. Davis? Yes, sir. Councilmember Shade.
Thank you. Mr. Davis, would you mind going back to that screen dealing with the retirement plan?
Yes, sir.
Well, that's depressing.
So that is. So just, you went through this pretty quickly and I just want to be trying to keep up with you. So the red numbers represent.
So the SCRS, that acronym is the South Carolina Retirement System, which is really open to just general employees. And then there's a distinction between the types of employees and the types of plans. So PORS is the police officer's retirement plan. It's open to only members of public safety. So you've got really two classes of employees in two separate plans. One are public safety related, which is the PORS, and the other is the general employees. Everybody else is in the SCRS plan.
And the percentages that represent what?
That is the funded percentage. So that is to say that those plans, if you pick SCRS, for example, the 57.1% is indicating that that plan has 57% of the assets it projects to need to pay all future benefits.
Right.
So it is underfunded by, whatever that math is. I'm an accountant and I don't want to say something wrong, but 37%.
So my memory may have lapsed on me some years back, but we were required to pay back into the system because of a deficiency.
Well, so the plans are dictated by the General Assembly in terms of their contribution requirements. And it's really a little bit unfortunate over the past few years due to pension reform legislation. Contribution requirements for employers, so the city in this example, have gone up significantly. I think for SCRS, we're about 18% of compensation is contributed. For PRS, it's 1% higher. I think it's 19%. That has gone up from about 10% about a decade ago. So that's ultimately a pretty significant increase. And unfortunately, the funded position, meaning that the assets versus the total plan liability, have not changed really much. In fact, if you happen to be interested in this, you can look in the annual comprehensive financial report in the required supplementary information section. There is a schedule of contributions, and to show you what the city made in terms of contributions 10 years ago and what it made this year and the percentage. And you can see that the amount being contributed to the plans has gone up significantly, but that has not been reflected in the funded position of the plans.
But some years back, there was a deficiency with the plan because of something that took place on the statewide level. And we had to increase our contributions to make up that deficiency. Are we caught up with that part? That's sort of my main question. Are we caught up with that portion of the deficiency catch-up side of it?
So the most recent legislation has a target of 85% funded. And we're very far from that. As you can see, the contribution percentages for employers are scheduled to continue to go up to a cap. It is capped. I forget exactly what the cap is, but to continue to go up until that 85% is basically reached. And of course, like I said, we've got a long way to go.
Let me just one more follow-up, if I may, Mr. Chairman. So is there a higher contribution that kicks in with a new hiree, a new employee, versus somebody who's been here for the past 20, 25 years?
No, sir.
It's the same rate.
Everybody has the same rate. It's 9% between 9 and 10% for employees. And then again, between probably 17 and 19 for the employer percent per employee.
I lied, one more question. I'm sorry. Sorry. Is there any, is it part of your recommendation that we need to do something to increase that percentage to get it to the 85% or?
Nothing the
just
city
leave
can
it
do.
alone?
Yeah, nothing the city can do. This is administered by the state Public Employee Benefits Authority. General Assembly sets all the legal requirements for participation. The city, and really the reason I highlight it is because the city really has no control over this number. If you were to write a check to PIBA today for $85.5 million, it wouldn't change the liability at all. I know that sounds odd, but it's really the reality of the participation in the plan.
Any other questions? We'll start with Councilmember Parker, then we'll go to the mayor. Councilmember Parker,
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
thank you.
And thank you for the presentation. Do you have this slide up here?
Yes,
The
ma'am.
historical fund balance at December 31st?
It's this one.
Yes, please.
Yeah.
Just real quick, just break that down for me again. Because it's not, are these the same numbers as we're seeing in the general fund revenues, expenditures and transfer?
Well, so this is historical and it's rounded, obviously, but so at 2022 on the far right, the blue line indicates your fund balance. So rounded, that should be the fund balance of the general fund, $133.5 million. And then the red line is expenditures, and really expenditures not including any other types of items. So it should just be pure expenditures in the general fund, again, rounded. And from an analysis perspective, what we look for in this is as these lines are moved closer together, it's indicative of your spending and your fund balance being largely the same. And of course, this would translate itself to having more fund balance on hand to fund operations, kind of more of a reserve, so to speak. And as they move farther apart, your spending is exceeding basically your fund balance amounts. And most places have a fund balance policy. I know the city does, though I don't recall exactly what it is, but I think just from a general perspective, the recommendation has always been somewhere between, or at least 3 months of fund balance on hand. And this is certainly there at 213 days.
Okay, all right, thank you. And then, so then on this one, on the general fund revenues, expenditures and transfers, do you know what, can you tell me what those two numbers are?
For this one, what you're going to have to do, because it includes interfund transfers, and you're going to have to add a couple of items. If you go to the financial statements themselves, and I'm going to refer to page 27. So your green bar there would be indicative of general fund revenues of about 218 million. Plus, if you go all the way down kind of to the bottom of the page, you've got transfers in of 16.5 million there. So revenues, expenditures, and transfers, that would be your green bar. So 217.7 plus 16.5 transfers in. And then on the way out, the red bar would be indicative of the 226 million in expenditures, really the second subtotal on page 27. And then the negative 2.6 million transfers out. So the sum of those two items together would give you your red bar.
Okay. All right, thank you very much.
Mayor Tecklenburg.
The reports that you mentioned that were late to the regarding firefighters grant, there was nothing bad about the reports. They were just filed tardy, correct?
Right. They are required to be filed, I believe, quarterly. And when we looked at them, again, if I recall right, they had not been filed at all.
Right.
And when we brought it to the attention of those in charge, they were subsequently completed and then filed. So yeah, I mean, I think if I had to characterize it, it's a timing issue.
Yeah. Okay. We got that well communicated now.
Yes, sir.
So a lot of discussion about the fund balance. Where in here do we report on what we often call the reserve, the cash reserve?
Sure. The fund balance. The fund balance figures which should be indicative. Ultimately, fund balance is not cash on hand, but certainly cash and other assets minus your liabilities. If you go to page 24 and 25, this presents the balance sheet, the second half of the balance sheet anyway, of the major funds, the governmental type funds, and then the non-major funds. And you can see, if you happen to go there, the general fund is on page 24, and that sort of bottom left-hand column there, 65.5, I'm going to start at the bottom and go up, is unassigned. And that unassigned portion is really available for appropriation, spending, so forth. And then as we move up, we have portions that are assigned. So 2.5 million for pension and other post-employment benefits, 2.5 million for purchases on order, so forth and so on, certain assigned for capital and infrastructure projects, and then a very small portion, what we call non-spendable. And it's non-spendable because it's in another asset, it's inventory. But if you're looking for your cash reserves, this is certainly, fund balance is certainly a function of that. And really that in conjunction with flipping over to page 22 and 23, where you can see the cash items, like the general fund on page 22, for example, has cash, unrestricted cash, I should say, of $72.1 million. And then if you flip back really fast to page 24, you can see the general fund also has liabilities of $31.5 million. So if you're really, cash is not the complete picture that a fund balance should provide, the better information of, all right, what can we appropriate? What could we spend or not, for that matter? And that unassigned figure is really, I think, the place to be.
The one of 65 million.
Yes, sir.
Correct. Thank you so much.
Any other questions for Mr. Davis? Anybody going once, going twice? No other questions? Thank you very much. Appreciate all your hard work on behalf of the city. We look forward to seeing you again this time next year.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right, thanks. Any other business to come before the audit committee? Before we adjourn, I just think we owe a debt of gratitude to Amy and Matt over there who keep us on the straight and narrow, get this great report. So thank you all very much. We're in excellent hands. Looks like we've had a good year. Let's keep up the hard work. And if there's nothing else to come before this committee, we will stand adjourned till this time next year. Thank you.
Hey, Steve.